Right, Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching, subscribing. I want to see, before we get into this, I want to please ask you, subscribe, like, comment, share. If you don't know what to comment, put a robot emoji underneath. That is going to be the new official Guru Nation comment. Why? Because we're breaking the algorithms. We're breaking the robots. YouTube doesn't want to show clinical research stuff, but if there's more comments, likes, shares, it will. So we're breaking the algorithms with the robots. Now, let's talk about all this. After the last video I did about CTAs, clinical trial administrators, clinical trial assistant, whatever you want to call it, I got a bunch of questions, and then I got one of them. So can you make, they said, wow, I'm early. Can you make a video describing the process of study startup at the industry level that a CTA would be expected to go through? So this would be pre-sites, right? Like, this is not startup where we're talking about what sites need to do to get started, right? This is from the sponsor level. It sounds like the question is, what does a CTA need to do? I think a lot of it has to do, and here's a huge caveat. I've never, unlike the other videos where I talk about sites and monitoring, I've actually never done this. I should take that back. I have very limited experience doing this. As a small, very niche CRO owner, I have helped a few sponsors do this, but I was not the main stakeholder taking care of this stuff, right? But in a way, you can say I was like a CTA in that role, because a lot of what I had to do revolved around site identification and feasibility. But if you're talking even before that, more upstream in the process, you're talking about FDA and IRB approving the protocol, right? And so the FDA doesn't necessarily need to approve the protocol, but it's good to have conversations with the FDA. So, and this is not what CTA is doing, but what CTA is doing is documenting the communication, filing the documentation of this communications in the trial master file, setting up, helping set up maybe a monitoring plan, helping with the SOPs of site identification and feasibility. This is what, at least in my situation, what I was doing pre-study startup, pre even site identification. This is just taking care of the internal things first. If you are working at a sponsor, you might also be looking at this point at CROs, and you're getting you're sending out RFPs to get bids from different CROs. Now again, as a CTA, I don't know how involved you're going to be, but let's just assume you're going to be more involved, because if you're watching this, you have an interview coming up. It's better to know more than less. So uh, you're submitting RFPs, so obviously there's CDAs, confidentiality disclosure agreements, that you need to have executed before you can send out any study specific information. You have a synopsis instead of actual protocol. You might have a completed protocol already. You might be in the process of IRB approval. You might be at the position where you haven't even selected an IRB, because remember, an IRB is a vendor. So a vendor is anyone helping the sponsor execute the study. A site is technically a vendor, even though they're so important of a vendor. They're not called vendors. Vendors are typically IRBs, central labs, IVRS systems, EDC systems, central recruiters. So you're looking at all these vendors. You're looking at what you're going to actually need for the study, and then who those vendors are. ECG, central ECG readouts, there's ERT, labs, IRBs, IWRS, EDC, patient reported outcomes vendor, who's going to supply the investigational product, Catalent usually, who's going to be in charge of the logistics for the IP and the labs and all that stuff. So CTA is very much involved at that level before the study even gets started, before sites are even selected. Once those things are figured out, and once the documentation with the FDA is okay, and this is where I'm a little bit unclear myself, just to be honest with you. I think the FDA needs to give an okay. I know the FDA has to give an IND when a sponsor wants to do a study. But to go from like a phase 1 to a phase 2 or a phase 2 to a phase 3, I don't think the sponsor needs a new IND, which is investigational new drug application. I think you only need that once, but I do think you need to have conversations. There are regulatory affairs people that are continuously having conversations with the FDA to make sure that the way they're designing the protocol, that the FDA would be okay with it. They're not necessarily looking, the FDA is not necessarily looking at the study like, hey, we're not approving this study. They're looking at the way the study is designed, uh, as if from the perspective of, is this enough data? Will we have, is this what we want to collect from the study to help us make a better analysis of whether the drug is safe or effective or both? Remember, phase 2 is mostly safety. Phase 3, you have efficacy in there as well. Phase 2, you have safety, then efficacy, primarily safety, then efficacy. Phase 3, you have efficacy and then safety. So there is people communicating with the FDA as a CTA. You might be involved in some of these communications, but really it might just be taking minute meetings or minutes from the meetings and documenting these in the reports, helping set up these conversations, maybe helping schedule these appointments, and then all the things with the vendors, right? Which IRBs, probably maybe even helping out with some budget stuff, like what's the IRBs, who's the CROs, what's the RFPs. Once, depending on how involved the CRO is, once you find a CRO, they tend to do a lot of the work as far as site selection. But if you are at the sponsor level as a CTA, you are probably involved as well to some degree. You ultimately, because remember, sponsor is the one responsible, so you're ultimately the one who's going to approve um, the sites, right? The sponsor is the one who's ultimately going to approve the sites. As a CTA, you have an important role if you're the CTA at a sponsor level. You're making sure that the sites the CRO is selecting are actually good. So you're filing feasibilities, and this is where a lot of overlap comes through, and this is where a lot of variability comes through, because sometimes you have very hands-on sponsors who want to be involved in everything even though a CRO is handling it, and other times you have a very laid-back sponsor that lets the CRO handle things and just does the bare minimum to have FDA compliance. Because remember, just like PI is responsible for the conduct of the study at the site, the FDA holds the sponsor solely responsible for the conduct of the study, regardless of whether a CRO is used. So that's before site selection. Then you throw in site selection, so you got feasibility, you have feasibility specialist, then you have once the sites are selected, then you have study startup specialist, and this is where we can start a new video, which I've done before, but I'll redo it if you guys want, on study startup site activities, all the regulatory at 1572 financial disclosure forms, IRB approval, all those kind of things. If you are a CTA, let me know if I missed anything from the sponsor side. Like I said, my experience is limited in this role, but I have done it, but it's limited. So I would love to interview you specifically to discuss the sponsor side of study startup before sites even come into the picture. Let me know in the comments next to a robot comment that you would come on the podcast and be so kind to share with Guru Nation. Let me know what else you guys want. I'm answering questions. Send them my way. YouTube, just comment or text me 949-415-6256 or email me Dan at theclinicaltrailsguru.com. Catch you later. Thank you.